Welcome on board. My name is Stelios Kavadias. I'm the director of the Strategic Business Growth Program. I'm a co-director of the Entrepreneurship Center. I'm also a faculty here at the Judge Business School. And I'm extremely pleased to be with you here today to share a couple of thoughts around growth. And together with two of my colleagues, Jeremy Hutchinson-Krupat and Joachim Krösen, who are going to be taking the sort of baton from me later on in this morning. Let me pull forward the agenda so that we're all aware of how this is going to look like. The overall objective is to share with you perspectives about growth, but do that in a style that resembles effectively the way we are conducting our work within the Strategic Business Growth Program, something that we've set up a few years back, 4 or 5 years now, and we have conducted with multiple companies, both in the UK and across the channel and the pond, in a sense, in an effort to sort of support executives such as yourselves, think through the details, the challenges, and the different dimensions of growth, and really work hands-on on how they could develop some kind of a growth project, a growth initiative within their organizations. Okay, so I'll start the day with a bit of a discussion around the strategy for growth, if you wish, or why growth is a strategic sort of initiative within most of the organizations. And then we will discuss two particular pillars, if you wish, of this effort to kickstart growth in a company. The first one is the challenges and the hidden detail challenges of operational efficiency around growth. So growth cannot happen without really looking inside the engine, let's put it like this, and thinking through why do we set up the engine in a particular way. And at the same time, also being able to come back and look at the intangible parts of the engine, the culture that we're creating around all the processes and all the standardized ways of doing business that we have, which make a huge difference between different organizations being able to sort of pursue effectively growth, right? So without further ado, I'll tell you one or two things about myself. I'm someone who is coming from an engineering background way back when, trying to specialize in microchip design in semi-successful and semi-unsuccessful ways, a little bit of an entrepreneurial effort back in my youth, which didn't go very well. And then I sort of joined INSEAD across the channel, did my research studies there, joined the Georgia Institute of Technology in the United States as a faculty member, as a professor for 10, 12 years. And then at 2012, I joined the ranks of the Judge Business School, coming back to that side of the pond. Throughout my career, I've been looking into problems of change, innovation, and growth, if you wish, from an operational standpoint, from the standpoint of how do we create structures and how do we create processes that can support and promote this perspective of change, innovation, and growth, let's say. And for me, this particular program has been a privilege to direct at some level, and at the same token also a personal passion, because I do fundamentally feel that the backbone of the economy is with the medium-sized sort of businesses that exist out there. Of course, there is the ultra big corporates, global corporates that are driving profitability and value and the likes, but the big part of the economies in every country is the medium size companies, small and medium-sized companies. And in that respect, I think it was a duty from our standpoint at the Judge Business School to be able to create a platform and to create a program that would cater towards that direction. People want to look at the very early stage ideas, sexiness of entrepreneurialism. They want to look at the bigger conglomerates of the Googles of this world and how they drive business. But I think we're forgetting oftentimes how we can support the true backbone of the economy, as I'm calling it, right? So in that respect, it's really a big privilege being here, okay, with you guys. Let's let me set out the rules. It would be great if we I see many of you have the cameras on now. Thank you so much. This is useful. I'm talking to people as opposed to black screens. It makes a huge difference for me. You can imagine about that. And at the same time, I'd like to make this as interactive and meaningful for you guys as possible. So my objective and my colleagues' objective later on in the day is to sort of share a few thoughts, as I said, and I'm going to do that just right now by starting with the first sort of topic. We will try to pose and put things into perspective and have a little bit of a Q&A, because I think it's useful for you, given that you might have questions around this. Do utilize the chat function as well. This is the new world of the Zoom meetings. And all of a sudden we realize that there's two channels of communicating. One is me talking to you. The other is people writing to each other on the chat. And that's an important aspect as well. And I'll pause also in certain instances, and one of my colleagues here in the room will help me pick up points that I might have missed on the chat. And eventually my objective is, by the end of the first hour that we're going to be spending together, is to give you at least an interesting sort of set of thoughts and a little tool that you can use if you go back to your organizations and you start thinking about the strategic mindset you want to be building around growth. Now, my colleagues are going to come in with a similar perspective, and this gives you also a flavor of how hands-on we want this course to be. It's a hands-on effort, really motivated by global thought leadership and research that most of us have done on the topic. Okay, assuming that this is good, let me go forward and really kickstart the discussion with what I would call this story about resilience and growth, right? Which is something of an ongoing saga. I mean, there's so much written about this. There's so many discussions happening out there about, how businesses can become more resilient, how can businesses keep growing at a steady and healthy pace. And the latest pandemic has actually put this story the same way that the financial crisis of 2008 had put this story at the epicenter of the economic discussion, right? So all of us have started realizing that, things are happening, and all of a sudden the assumptions that we're making around business contexts are changing. That is not new. It's attenuated in the way it happened with the COVID, but it was happening all the time for most of us who have been looking at this, right? All organizations face this ongoing quest of resilience and growth. And I did send out a little survey, and some of you were extremely kind to sort of take time of your busy diaries and send back some thoughts. And really that survey was trying to sort of gauge whether at some level you are facing visible signals that make you worried as people of responsibility within your organizations around certain aspects. So for example, is the product quality a concern for us? Do we see, because of the pandemic or because of other reasons, the product quality being compromised, the performance, or even the customer service that we're offering is facing issues and shortcomings? So we can't really offer all the touch points of the service process that we wanted, or for some reason we tend to be much slower at the way we're serving customers and we're engaging with customers. And there was a bit of a concern there. What you see here as percentages is rough terms of how, from the little survey I got out, things that made some of you feel concerned or very concerned. We have some impact or a severe impact in our business. What's really interesting is that many of you, 75% almost of the ones who responded, felt like the customer has shifted drastically. And even in a B2C and a B2B contexts, we have seen the customers shifting as well. And there were quite some redistributions of market shares. This is a turbulent era. It's not unreasonable given the fact that the pandemic has been extremely challenging, right? But it is something that, for better or worse, you have noted, and I needed to sort of get a perspective about that. In some B2B contexts, there were also contractual challenges by contracts being sort of challenged or delayed in terms of the customer engagements that you had. And finally, looking back in how we delivered the value that we delivered to people, we ended up having, again, some issues in terms of delays, absenteeism, challenges with working from home in a sense, but also some lesser, that was a positive thing, challenges in terms of supply chain. So what I try to sort of get out of all this picture is a reality that we see oftentimes as we're engaging with small and medium-sized enterprise cohorts such as yourselves. It's the fact that there is signals out there that experienced leaders such as yourselves are picking up, and by picking them up, it starts putting us into this discussion of what's happening. Are we resilient? Are we losing steam? Should we be rethinking about what we do? Are we keeping up with growth? Is the sales potentially plateauing? And what exactly is happening? And that is the base upon which I would like to sort of open up a little discussion with you. Because in a sense, there is the first knee-jerk, if you wish, defense mechanism in those cases where we are trying to create a patch around a particular observation or signal that we use. And then we try working that patch out and making sure that the business keeps running and so on and so forth until something else springs out. And then we create another patch. And then we create a third patch. And we start getting into this ongoing challenge with the little issues and challenges that may arise in our business without necessarily taking a little bit of a step back and thinking about the broader structure. And what do I mean about thinking about the broader structure? The broader structure is coming into starting to look at those challenges, not necessarily as one-offs, where anything else is staying intact and we don't think about that, but starting to look at those challenges as something that might be more of an interconnected story that we need to be concerned about, right? So in a sense, we start seeing that there is challenges that emerge in different dimensions, be it challenges that relate to the offerings that we have, right? And the services that we offer to different customers and clients, being the fact that we're facing issues with the customer changing somehow and trying to understand, is the customer changing? Is the customer leaving us? Is the customer avoiding or don't like anymore what it is that we offer? Challenges that relate to how we're serving what we're serving to the customers, B2C or B2B, independent of the context, the back office, the operations, the production, the service facilities, all those things that we've put together, and all of a sudden they seem to be swamped in business and not being effective and creating delays or unable to keep up the quality output the way we originally have envisioned and have set it out. So things that relate to the how we do the business, and eventually all this might put at the epicenter an even broader challenge, which is we see a completely different business landscape out there, and our role into that landscape becomes questionable. Are we still as competitive as we were, right? And in a sense, once we start putting such structural elements into the picture, the second thing we understand is the fact that those elements are interdependent. So in a sense, something that we see as a signal in one of those dimensions, the fact that we have customer shifts, might have root causes in any of the other dimensions. It might be customer shifts because we don't offer the same as before. It might be customer shifts because we are not actually talking to the same customers as we used to, and the segments in terms of the market have changed. It might be customers shifting because the dimensions that the customers value have changed drastically, and all of a sudden we have created a nice engine that offers a particular type of performance and a particular type of output to people, but that's no longer what we want. So in a sense, those four little quadrants, dimensions, circles, are interconnected, and they start having a challenge, coordinated challenge. Now, that implies that the first thought that we can undertake in such instances is starting to look at changing something. And the patching process that I mentioned before could be a changing effort, right? It could be a changing effort within the short term and within the current madness of the business that we're living in. But maybe those short, uncoordinated efforts might not really address the bigger picture here, which is a need for change and a need for something more systemic and systematic in how we're driving that change. And that's where we can come forward and we can start thinking about what people would call an importance of thinking more strategically about growth. And I'll borrow a definition of strategy here, because strategy is a concept that everybody talks about and many people talk about different things, but I'll go off of one of the bigger scholars in terms of what strategy is. And I'll talk about strategy as a cohesive response to an important challenge, which actually fits very well the context that we're discussing now, right? So thinking about an important challenge, thinking about the fact that we are not seeing those signals being so positive or easy to handle for us, and eventually needing to take a step back and looking at the broader picture on how we're defining what it is that we do in order to get to the outcomes that we want, right? So rethinking, in a sense, our strategy. Now, this rethought can be relatively simpler and more localized in one of the dimensions, right, that I'm going to be describing later on, but it can also be something a bit broader that we need to think. Nevertheless, if we want to go down that path, we need to think more systematically about 3 key issues. And that's where the journey starts, even in the program that we're sort of defining. The first thing is understanding, diagnosing where we are right now, and having a clear picture of where we are. And I'm going to go a little bit into detail later on this morning on this. Second thing is creating something new, a new guiding route, path, policy, a way of getting to a destination that's going to give us an advantage over the current condition that we have. So we're starting at a particular condition, we want to go into a better condition, we need to create that little path, right? That takes us from the first point to the last point, and the last point has to be a clearly envisioned advantageous position. Otherwise, there's no point to make this change. And the third thing is translating all this thing into a coherent action plan for being able to deliver the type of growth and the type of outcome that we want. So those 3 elements start becoming extremely important to be able to sort of drive the phenomenon. Now, here's a little secret on this. That's not easy. And I'm not giving you a secret. I'm actually telling you something that possibly you have envisioned and understood yourselves. But this is definitely not an easy task to do. And it's not an easy task to do because it requires sort of a systematic approach on how you're looking at those different elements. And it cannot be done in an ad hoc manner. And it cannot be done in a broken down temporally effort. I do something today, then I do something, a year from now, then maybe I'll do something, in the next couple of years, and things are going to pan out. It requires a dedicated, focused effort, an effort that's going to require you to move away above the business and the business reality of the day and look at the business with different perspectives. And that's really what we're trying to offer. We're trying to offer a sort of a safe shell, if you wish, within which that can happen effectively for different businesses. So that's not easy to do. And not only that's not easy to do, but very quickly we tend to fall into what I would call common mistakes that leaders do when they think about strategy. So bear with me for a second around this, because I think those mistakes are becoming kind of so frequent that it's really useful to list them out before we go forward, and I start giving you a little bit about the tool around this. So what are some of those mistakes? The first is we tend to confuse strategy with generalities and sometimes fluff, unfortunately. I think we have a responsibility there as business schools about that sometimes, and the public press as well. So we tend to sort of think that strategy is creating an aspirational statement or a purpose or a mission, and that's not necessarily sufficient in a sense, right? We need to think much more carefully, not about restating things that might be obvious or things that might be somewhat novel for us, but we need to be thinking about a coherent description about what this is, what this strategic position that we start from is, and how we're going to get to the new destination. So that's an element that we work a lot for and with in the initial parts of the program. But the second big mistake that happens here is we start stepping into the looking into the mirror challenge for most of us, which is not easy. And I do recognize that. That's why it's not an easy process. So that becomes the era where many leaders or several leaders start avoiding to think critically and creatively about the business. And I think that's also an important dimension out there, right? Because in order to be able to drive success, to drive growth, to drive the next step of the business, we need to understand the weaknesses, the challenges, what is not working right now based on the signals that we see, which then implies two key qualities. First, being critical about what it is that we do and scrutinizing our hypotheses and our assumptions. That's one obstacle to bypass. And then the second is including a bit more of, if you wish, creative thinking. Strategy is also a creative process because we need to create this new destination, this new objective that we will reach in terms of growth and in terms of output, right? So we need to come up with solutions that we haven't tried before. So in a sense, it's important to sort of introduce those two different qualities, a critical look at what we do and the creative thinking at some level, right? The third challenge is then escaping the actual challenge. I mean, all these things are great, but one of the key challenges around strategy and strategic thinking, I think, is the fact that we need to have somehow the propensity to do tough choices. Strategy is not necessarily what we do, but it can be what we choose not to do. Let me give you a very simplified scenario that I've seen in many businesses in the small to medium size sort of journey that they follow. We start successfully, we have the first few customers, we grow the customer base, and then demands are coming to us, which is not exactly how we grew the customer base, but it's adjacent. And then we start opening up to those adjacent demands. So can you offer me your product or your service plus? And there is one plus, and a second plus, and a third plus. And at some level, you reach a point where you have introduced so many pluses into this business that what it is that you offer is everything almost that the customer wants. Who is your customer is everyone who shows at your door. And that, as my colleague Jeremy Hudson-Krupat will talk about later on, that starts becoming a big challenge for how you deliver the value. And by the time that we diagnose this, is a bit late because complexity has kicked in. We are not something clear to our customers. We're everything to everyone, if you wish. And all of a sudden that starts becoming detrimental for our business. This is what I mean by hard choices. It's taking a hard look back into something that has been a successful journey, but really refocusing it in a way that's going to be taking us to the next era for the business that we're leading, right? So this notion of making hard choices is central to that. Let's move on into the fact that many leaders that we've met and engaged with very quickly move into defining their strategy based on goals. You know what? Our strategy is to grow by 25%. That is not a strategy. That is a target. Potentially, that's the right target. Don't get me wrong. You are the experts on this. I cannot give you advice on what the right target for growth for any business is going to be. But what I can tell you is that simply stating a target is potentially harmful, more harmful than thinking through why this is the right target and how you're going to be reaching that right target. So aspirations can be expressed through those targets in a sense, but it's only through the hard work of synchronizing these targets with the challenge at hand, the mission that you're setting out for yourselves, and at the same time, the means, the way you're going to be getting there in a more coordinated fashion that you're going to be achieving effectively the outcome. I think oftentimes the assumption is we're setting the target and the organization is going to pull themselves up to deliver that target. As Joachim will discuss with you later on, and that hits into the core of the culture, that is an assumption. That is not necessarily the reality of how we're going to be looking at strategy. So again, it's important to avoid that trap of thinking that targets are going to lead us there. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that targets are useless, right? I'm saying that targets have to be there coordinated with something else. And again, we're working a lot during the program on that. Finally, putting together a plan of coordinated as opposed to uncoordinated actions and tasks becomes a big challenge when we think about growth and the strategy for growth. Oftentimes, well-intentioned initiatives by everyone in our organization that come to us as leaders and say, I can do this for helping out, I can do that for supporting. Those are well-intentioned efforts, but unless there is a broader agenda and a plan of coordination around this, very quickly, the path from the initial point to the end point is detracted in so many different directions that it's also almost impossible to understand. So in a sense, we're coming back by trying to ensure that as we look at this as a process of doing things, taking us from the initial challenge through a diagnosis to a new path, a new policy that leads us into a coherent action plan, we need to hit all those different touch points in a way that we understand them, we support them, but also the people that are around us within our organizations are going to be willing to understand them. That's not an easy process. So hopefully now you see why we're starting with this discussion. And I keep saying this is not an easy process, and we need to take those elements one by one with the right tools and the right support in order to be getting there. Okay, so let me very quickly pause here for a second and open up the discussion if there is any question or any immediate sort of reaction that you guys might be having along those lines before I jump and I move into the next little tool that I want to introduce for the next 10, 15 minutes, and then I'm going to open up for the broader Q&A. Does this resonate with you? Do you see instances that you've lived through where those 5 bullet points that I've laid out are becoming confusing elements of how we're pushing the boundary for the business? Oftentimes, does this bring out something that you feel makes sense?
Hi everyone. Hi Stelios.
Hi, Michelle.
For me,
is that you? Yes. Yep.
Yeah, for me, thank you. I think it really made sense about what you said about how we've set a target and possibly not the strategy, and our growth is set around headcount and a revenue figure, and expecting the organisation to pull itself up to that level. So that's a real thought thing for me, and we're just opening a new office at the moment. So it's how we build the strategy around that and not around the revenue and headcount. So thank you.
Exactly. Exactly. Very good. Thanks. It's good to hear this. You see, it's important. I think it's really important, Michelle, as you're looking into this. Obviously, the numbers will make sense. Obviously, numbers need to make sense, and obviously, everything has to come together. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to put this into a systematic way by which, even if you feel lost into how am I going into the next step, you can grab back into a series of touch points, if you wish, right? That could allow you to very quickly refocus the effort that's happening towards a particular direction. I think that's really the gist behind this, and that's the spirit of the program, in a sense, right? So this is not an effort to come and tell you the latest and greatest articles and the latest and greatest sort of research that happens here, and here you go, off you go, make up your mind. It's quite the opposite. The gist of the program is distilling what we have seen. People like myself, like Jeremy, like Joachim, distilling what we have seen and what we've written ourselves, putting it into a structure and a number of tools that make sense. And we have tested them repeatedly with leaders such as yourselves. And then eventually trying to put them to use with an ongoing support from a coaching team that spends time in parallel, continuously translating and guiding that effort. So it's a very concerted effort to sort of get to an outcome. I mean, the objective for us is to really, for anyone who comes on a program like this, to sort of drive a specific outcome. And I can, at the end, when the Q&A, I can share some more details on that. Let's see. So having said this, let me, unless there is anything, I'm quickly monitoring the chat. This is my new world, right? Where I have to have 2 eyes, one looking on the chat and the other looking at you guys, so that I can make sure that everybody's happy out there on the business. It seems that I don't see any major comment coming. If there's any comment, Stelios, Gail, jump up and help me. Jörg, you have a question?
Yes. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Yes. Quick question on who is actually you think should be involved into the strategy making. On one hand, you're saying you need to involve all views from all aspects of business. Usually, strategy is panned out on director level or on a higher management level. But obviously, you need to take some people with you from lower levels, and it's very important to have input there. So how would you? I mean, you were talking about differences of big companies and small companies at the very beginning. How would you see this being done in a small company?
Very good question, Jörg. I mean, it's the obvious the obviously non-existing answer is the actual number. I cannot tell you 5 people, right? I mean, that would be a mistake on my side. What I can tell you, I think, which would resonate much more with what you correctly observed, is the following. Definitely at the director leadership team level, there has to be a common understanding and a common viewpoint crafted and cultivated. Otherwise, you're starting with a problem. And that's one of the key works that we try to undertake also in the program. That's why we don't open up the program to an individual, but actually the proposition that we've put out to leaders such as yourself is we want the director and the top 2 lieutenants or 3 lieutenants to come on board and really work with us under a common price, in a sense, right? So the idea there is we want to use the program as an effort to cultivate that top common viewpoint and leadership. Now, as myself, as Jeremy, and as Joachim are going to be saying repeatedly in different instances coming from different angles, the real big observation that you made here is bringing the people along with you. And that, in my view, and that's how it comes across into the program, right, requires a couple of things. First is in the creation of novel outcomes and novel paths, in a sense of where we need to go, you can leverage the knowledge inside your company. You can reach out to people and say, can we do this? Can we think about this? So you can put it as a task for them contributing. That's one thing. Second, by crafting the new coordinated plan that we talked about, you need to start delineating different roles and different interactions. So you try to create an effective web of connections, reportings, targets that will be supporting, at least on plan and paper, the overall effort. And there is a tool and there's an effort that we undergo there particularly specified for this, what we call cascading the mission to a plan. And then eventually there is the most difficult one that Johan is actually involved with, the cultural aspect, which goes into the intangible. So it's not simply stating something on a paper, but really looking behind and beyond the paper and trying to understand what it is in terms of the different dimensions and factors that will make people motivated, that will get people, agitated and excited about getting on board with this new effort, and creating that mindset of somewhat novelty, somewhat creativity, but also aspiration in the organization that will take you forward. That's where this comes. So it's multiple things that need to happen where you need that input, right? And you need to, as a leader and as a leadership team, you need to coordinate this. But I would say it starts with an absolute alignment in the leadership team, which then effectively through different initiatives and efforts, you're cascading and you're disseminating to the rest of the organization. It will be an ongoing flow of information back and forth, right? But at least, again, it has to be structured in your minds, at least. It has to be structured so at any point in time, you can be aware of, okay, we're now trying to get this message across. And later on, we're trying to respond to this reaction by the people, and so on and so forth. Does it make sense, Jörg, what I'm saying?
Yes, it makes absolute sense to me. The challenge I sometimes see is coming from the basically from the people feeding into strategy thinking from below, because they don't always have the full picture.
Exactly.
And then they divert in actions from where we want to go. Sometimes do not understand the full picture, and obviously it's the leadership team which would need to educate, or let's say to not to educate. That sounds very bad, actually.
It's not. As an educator, I'm not going to say take it back. Don't worry. You're right. Absolutely. It's at some level, it's educating the leader and the team. I mean, it's all of us educating ourselves, right? In the broad sense of the word. So don't feel bad about the choice of the word.
Well, I see this as Stelios. I see this as that process, this information flow is. I think that there might be a lot of sometimes resistance or potential challenges, conflict attached to that.
Exactly.
Where people on the let's call it ground floor don't necessarily agree with what comes from upstairs.
Absolutely. And that's where
challenge.
And that is the challenge. Resistance is the challenge, and that's why the intangible aspect of the challenge, the cultural, the non-spelled out elements of the way we do the business, which, I mean, I'm abusing a lot the notation in the discussion that Joachim is going to have, but trying to sort of offer a little bit of a glimpse there. This intangible part is becoming extremely important. And that's where the leadership team has to think about, how do we take the people with us? There's going to be resistance, as you said. There's going to be different opinions, but it's a lot more information. It has to be a systematic effort to really work through how you're getting that message and that onboarding across. There's different tools and there's different approaches. I mean, we can't cover everything right now, but absolutely right. I think in what you're saying, that is part of the discussion, and that's coming as we're looking at the program that's coming into the into one of the modules later on that Johan is involved a lot. I did see an interesting question by Johannes, right? In terms of the agility of the environment, customers, and how often do you reformulate strategy? I saw already Costas jumped the gun there in terms of a response, and I'll echo this. It's very hard in those very high level problems to give back a response that says every 3 months or every 6 months. I would say definitely when a set of signals and challenges are surfacing enough that they make us worried. But obviously, having every 6 months or even every year an away day where you just discuss through and you confirm once more that the current strategic position that you have, which I'm going to go right now into trying to introduce a tool that might be helpful for you guys, trying to get that current strategic position that you have rethought and reassessed once per year at least for a small and medium-sized company is a healthy exercise. There is no loss out of that. It will force you to try to look at the bigger picture, and it will force you also to keep in touch with the key elements of what you could call your current strategic position that you sort of occupy, if it makes sense. Very good, excellent. So let me jump the gun. There's a hand up by I cannot see the name. So I mean, if you Jim. Can jump up.
Hi, Stelios. It's Jim from Outfield. Just hopefully a quick one. We've made all the mistakes that you were describing there at some point during our strategy. Okay. I'd like to think we're moving away from some of that now, largely due to having sort of more consistency in the business. And as we're sort of, at least at the directorial level, understanding the benefits of strategy. Yep. Whereas before we were making it because, quote unquote, we were supposed to, for pitch decks or whatever it is. And I guess talking about engagement at the SMT level to convey to people the benefits of strategy and getting that right at the start is quite a subtle difference between we're supposed to do this and here's why it's useful. And obviously that's what you do for a living. Any tips on how to sort of convey to our senior management team what the benefits of getting a effective strategy are, getting them the right mindset to go?
Think about the an effective strategy. Let's even start with a clear strategy, right? A clear strategy, which in my mind means a strategy that you can clearly articulate to somebody that might not even be involved in the business to start with. Somebody with a business experience, but not necessarily one of you guys. That's what I'm trying to say. Is already a big plus in being able to move forward and see effective outcomes by utilizing the strategy. Oftentimes, what I've seen is what I discussed as generality / everything goes as a strategy, as long as it brings money in. And that is oftentimes, again, the beginning of the problem. I mean, for a small company that retains a small structure, it can be okay. It's not going to be detrimental. We get one client here, one client there, we go by the day, and so on and so forth. But if the aspiration is to really move up, even in a reasonable 10% limit in terms of growth, without killing ourselves, in a sense, I think then the importance of that clarity of the strategic position and what it is that we do, in a sense, becomes readily important, impertinent. That's the word I was looking for. So how to make this clear? Well, the obvious way is war stories that show how bad this can become, right? In terms of the story. I mean, one of my favorite stories there, I'm going to very quickly share this, is Lego and the Lego Corporation that I worked with them at some point through case studies with Kostas and another colleague, Christoph Loch, from the Judge Business School. And essentially at some point, Lego is one of the most successful brand names that you see out there today. And back in 2004 was almost in the verge of bankruptcy, right? And when you look back at what led them to this bankruptcy is the fact that they were so successful in the beginning that they created a brand name. Then they thought that brand name could be everywhere. So they started creating cars, dolls, I mean, anything that has nothing to do with the bricks, nothing to do with the focus of what got them there to be Lego branded. They spread themselves so thin that then anything became a strategy which was not existing until the moment that there was a very inspirational leader, von Knudstrup, actually, who came on board and refocused the entire exercise around the core of the business, which was the how, right? We're making efficiently a number of different products out of very few bricks, and spelling this out in a way that resonated with the customer, meaning that educating the customer on why this is the best way to have fun for the kids and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, that thing turned around, and now it's fourfold big. It's becoming one of the big mega corporations. So war stories help sometimes, but in the end of the day, I'm going to let also Jeremy and Joachim later on pin into this, because I think they have perspectives as well on how you can create the discipline in place that really showcases in terms of the indexes that an effective strategy, a clear strategy, makes sense, if you wish, right? So having said this, thanks for the questions and the points, guys. This is really on the money in terms of the discussion. I'm really enjoying the discussion today as it comes along. Let me very quickly showcase you the first tool that we're using when we think about strategy, and it's gonna be something that tries to operationalize the current strategy that the company has in a very effective way, right? So we start with the basic observation that for any company there has to be a market position. So there is something that you offer to somebody that defines who you are in a market as a company, right? So I sell cars, I sell bikes, I sell coffee, I distribute stuff from other people to some people. I do something. So there is a way to describe what it is that you do, and there's also a limit potentially to that. Tough choice number one. And there's a way to describe who is your customer, and again, there has to be a limit there. Is everyone your customer? Are there specific segments that you cover demographically, geographically? Who is your customer starts becoming an important sort of element and description. And oftentimes, even in very early businesses, even in idea stage startups, you see how challenging this is as they're trying to struggle with the idea of creating what people call the product market fit. But even later on, there's another challenge that happens for most of us, where we have had the first two customers, we have had the first two products that we created that the customers liked, and then our market position becomes what ended up being defined through the process of engaging with the customers, and we assume that this is the position that we keep continuing and going forward. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. Maybe we need to revisit the market position, but there's definitely a market position, right, on this, which then it's expanded to become what I would call a strategic position by the how component. How do I deliver this value? So there is a what that I deliver, there is a who that I deliver this value to, and there's a how that I'm defining how I deliver the value to I deliver the what to the who, if you want me to put it in those terms. And that's a very complex and challenging dimension to think about. In our experience, this is where most of us, including myself, when I try to sort of make the assessment of the strategy of the Judge Business School or other organizations that have been on the board, this is where we're starting to swamp in terms of exactly what do we put in there. So what we put in there in the how is, what is our pricing and revenue models? Do we have partnership agreements? Do we have partners that we deliver the value, or do we do it solo? There is a limit there. Are we outsourcing stuff? Are we doing it in-house? That defines our how. Key activities that we have. Do we need R&D or not? Do we need sort of some kind of a service manufacturing traditional process? Do we need some kind of a sales process? Do we need a business development process? What is it that we need as key tasks out there that help us continue offer the value that we're offering after sales, service, maintenance? Depending on the different businesses, you can look at the different tasks. What drives the costs for this elements is becoming an important, is very, very, very expensive assets, cheap assets, the equipment, whatever it is that we need to be specialized equipment, specialized technology, that we need to have that. And obviously the how is also relating to the more intangible things, tangible and intangible, in terms of how do we govern all these things? Do we have one central office and then multiple sort of location-based offices where we sell things? Do we have one centralized location and people are coming to us? Do we do everything on the web and there is partners and employees distributed all around? I mean, there is governance-related questions that we have, and a way by which we do business, right? The fact that we're all working collaborative together, the fact that we're very customer-centric, and other elements that could describe the way the culture that we have. So those things those three things define a strategic position in a sense, and start becoming sort of different. So the combinations that we make as choices make us who we are, and we have the capacity to be somewhat different by making different choices than others. But what makes this a competitive sort of strategy in a sense is being able to ask and respond to the last question of this quadrant here, the why part. Why do customers come to us? why are we different than every other strategic position in the same industry, every other entity, company that is serving similar who's like we do, in a sense? Why are we becoming are we offering some distinctive value proposition to them? That's really the answer that make us look as distinctive and competitive, and makes this a competitive strategic position. So the very first element there starts becoming, to what extent, coming back to the earlier point made, to what extent are we making a, let's say, are we making an initiative effort to assess this strategic position and be able to delineate clearly how do we populate those 4 dimensions? When most of the companies that we work with, when we look at such a tool, they usually look back at us and they go like, okay, I mean, that's pretty straightforward for most of us, until the moment that you start doing it. And at the moment that you start looking and doing such a thing, you already start realizing how difficult it is to populate a strategic position. And the second thing, how difficult it is to make it in a clear and concise way. It's an effort, is the initial mirror, in a sense, that we're putting up, and we're sort of asking leaders such as yourselves to look against that mirror and start realizing where the blind spots are. Are we clear on who our customer is? Can we actually describe convincingly a non-customer, somebody that we don't want to serve? Can we describe the limitations, especially in service businesses like many of you guys might be? Can we describe a limit to what type of services do we offer and what services we will not offer? We will forego income potentially right now for the focus of doing something bigger, more focused, more dedicated later on, because that's not what we do. That's not who we are. That's not what expertise we carry. So those elements start helping us assess that initial level and that initial position. And at some level, the good thing is that we are trying through this to either confirm or challenge how distinctive our current strategic position is, given the fact that we've seen challenges, as we said earlier on, and at the same time being able to sort of drive a new one, if we need to think about that. Now, the good news is that, you know, thank God in any industry, there's not only one strategy. I mean, there's multiple different competitive strategies, right? And we just need to pick one. So it's not that we're all different companies in a particular industry are looking to pick one strategic position. That's not the case. Now, the challenge at the same time is choosing what this right position is, which is usually implying addressing a trade-off, a key business question that has no obvious answer. Let me make this very explicit with a particular example that comes from the printing world, right? At some point in time, the big players like Xerox and Canon, and I can cite examples like this, like Airbus and Boeing. There's this mega examples, right, that make the point extremely clear. At some point, they were competing on the same business, in a sense. What's the business? Designing and manufacturing copiers for people like me, you, whoever wants to be using them. There was a fundamental business trade-off that they make a completely different choice. It was a bet, in a sense. It was the fact that there's people who want one or the other. There's people who want, you know, speed and volume, and there's people who want higher quality in terms of the printout work that they have. Both of them coexist, so somebody needs to make a choice, and they made different choices. But then what they did is they coordinated those choices down to the rest of the elements of the strategic position to be aligned. So if you're going for speed and high volume, then the product has to actually be speedy and very high volume. Large devices that spit out pages by the minute. The metrics are how many pages by the minute you can spit out, how many pages can you sustain in this mega beast, and so on and so forth. As opposed to a low volume thing, which means that they define little printing devices that can go even into homes and into different smaller businesses. Who is the customer? Obviously, if you want volume, it must be a company, a corporation that needs a lot of volume of those things. smaller companies wouldn't look into this. It doesn't make sense. But at the same time, how do you achieve this efficiently? Of course, you do your R&D, you do your production, your manufacturing, but because it's large companies and those machines need to be catered to because of the large volume, they need maintenance, they break down often and so on and so forth. You need to have direct sales, direct maintenance, potentially not even selling those, but leasing them because you can take them back and you can maintain them effectively, as opposed to just having a network of dealers, selling out your devices commission. You make the money in terms of the higher end and premium prices that you charge, and so on and so forth. So two main messages is that as we're looking at this strategic position, we start questioning what is the core trade-off that we've made the choice on. We went for speed. Did we go for quality? Did we go for low cost? What it is that in the end of the day, we have made ourselves distinct about vis-a-vis competition. And at the same time, do we actually support this? Do we have products that stand up for what we say? Do we have products that actually, do we have customers that really want that? Do we go after those customers? And are we consistently structuring our operation around this? You see that alignment and that consistency, that focus a lot behind high growth companies, sort of usually. I'll put a pause here and open up a bit the discussion again, because we have 8-9 minutes before I pass the baton to my colleagues. But this gives you a sense, just to take it back to the actual tool, this gives you a sense of something that we introduce into the course, and then together with the right coaching support, companies start engaging in crafting the clarity, or simply stating the clarity around those strategic positions in a way that then they can use this as a basis with other tools that we offer to start looking critically and creatively on this initial strategic position to drive the new guiding policy that I said later on. Any thoughts or any questions that you guys might have around this before I sort of close that initial first session? We take a quick break for 5 minutes and come back to hear from Jeremy Hudson-Krupat, my colleague. Yes, please, I see a hand up. I cannot see names, unfortunately, for some reason that I don't know. But
hi, can you hear me?
Arthur, yes, I can hear Arthur. Yes, go ahead.
Very good. My question is, in an agile environment where there's a constant change, do you think having a multiple strategies is viable? Do you think we should have like multiple strategies worked on simultaneously, given the fact that it's almost impossible to predict which one could work?
I would say, Arthur, this is a very good question. You're opening up a very good question, which can take us, into multiple semantics. But let me try to make it very practical. My quick answer would be no. In what sense? In the sense that I think your strategy should be to explicitly be very flexible on how you adapt, how you match the what to the who in such an agile environment, right? Because agility, what agility tells me when you describe it in those terms, means that the customers are different. They have different perspectives and different demands all the time, or there are new customers showing up, and that their demands make it extremely hard for you to have a consistent what. So the what needs to be stretched in and out, right? So let me reflect on this very quickly. First question that I have, which you will have to look into, is this really the case? Or are you experiencing agility because you have not necessarily taken the focus of saying, we're catering to those customers with that demand, the other customers, no, that's not our cup of tea, they can go elsewhere. Question number one. So volumes and relative volumes around the customers. That's the first thing. Second thing, if this is indeed the case, it could be, right? I'm recognizing this. Then the question becomes, to what extent you can build flexibility and agility in the how to make the continuous ongoing matching between this very bespoke demands and bespoke products. So essentially, your strategy is to be very customized oriented. So you have one strategy, but then you have to continuously work activities, processes, roles, everything that comes together with that to induce flexibility as the number one competitive element and distinctive element of your organization. So again, in that sense, I would say no to parallel strategies. I think there's one strategy still that you're going after, which is built around flexibility and customization, which may or may not be the right thing. Again, that I cannot verify, but you wouldn't necessarily call this different strategies. It's still your competitive advantage to be able to be this ongoing matching platform between very varying demands and very varying outputs. However, my cautionary sort of statement goes as well, are you sure that this is the environment? Oftentimes, what I've seen is leaders who really looked at the environment and interpreted that environment being agile, but this was sort of endogenous. That was created by the previous stance of the organization trying to go after every single customer. So the inherent culture in the organization that had emerged is everyone is a customer, and whatever demand they have, we're going to be dealing with, and we're going to deliver whatever product they demand us to do, and so on and so forth. That might be a symptom of lack of focus as opposed to the true nature of the demand and the environment out there. So just as a caution statement, I don't know the details, so I can't really tell you more. But actually, just as a point for the program, in the program we would try to challenge an organization such as this to really verify the assumptions around that agility and see whether agility is the true state of the world, if you wish, and not something that we're something that is just experienced. Agility by choice as opposed to agility by emergence, in a sense. So Claire asked me to go back to the slides of the, of course, Claire, here you go. I hope it sort of makes sense. I also saw that Jeremy Hudson-Krupa has jumped the gun on board, so he's here for the next session. I'll close. I hope, Claire, you took a snapshot of this, because I'm going to be closing now with a to be continued statement. In what sense? To be continued along two lines. So here is a very quick journey of the program that you guys are experiencing a taster for. Thanks for being very good sport, by the way, today in terms of the questions and so on and so forth. Keep up the energy, because there's two more high energy people like me coming on board. Jeremy Hudson-Krupa is going to take the baton after the 5-minute break. But essentially, what we discussed is we really discussed a tool and a story around clarifying our current strategic position as a starting point so that we can build the critical, creative insight that will lead us to a new policy, to a new set of choices that we make, and then we can create a coherent action. Now, in that creation, so we're going to jump into the third part that I introduced. There is two fundamental pillars in my mind that I asked the two colleagues of mine to sort of share thoughts on. The first, which is what Jeremy is going to be talking about, is the efficiency or not question that we often have, right? And to what extent there are limits to this, and how we can think about efficiency in our engine, operational engine, in delivering the value that we have. To some extent, the latest question from Arthur was linking to that. I mean, do we want to hit all types of agility and variation, or maybe there's a limit to that we need to ask? And I think Jeremy is going to come back with a couple of critical thoughts on this. Knowing him, I can tell you that much. And then Joachim is going to take the intangible side of this that says, yeah, it's what originally we discussed with Jörg when he made the point about how do you take the people with you? That is something important that should be in the mind of every leader, right? How do I continuously create the circumstances to take people with me and create this culture for growth that we want to instill in organizations? Until then, the only thing I can tell you is I hope that you enjoyed this first part and discussion. I'm putting the to be continued slide there for multiple reasons. One is we're continuing in 5 minutes, starting now. I'm going to go on a break, but also to be continued with some of you in case you really want to engage further with the program. So let us know. I put there the website, and we'll be more than happy to hold further discussions with you, okay? So until then, many thanks for being a good sport. I'm going to be here, but silent from now on. In that respect, let's go for a very quick break for the next 5 minutes, and 10:05 cameras will switch on, and we'll get back into discussing on the second part. Thanks, everyone.